Thank you so much for each of you being here. I want to briefly introduce to you each of our speakers. Before we start, to each speaker, please, when I mention your name, just raise your hand as an identifier. Nancy Mercante, a little higher. Nancy Mercante is founder and president of the nonprofit named Citizens for Delaware Schools, whose mission is to educate the public about Delaware's public education system and solutions that can improve their performance. She serves on the board of Healthy Foods for Healthy Kids, which educates children about healthy eating through a school garden program. Dr. Tanya Hettler. Dr. Hettler is the director of the Center for Education Excellence at the Cesar Rodney Institute. She received her MA and PhD in psychology from the University of Delaware. She has worked as a clinician and currently works for greater transparency and improved academic outcomes for Delaware public school students through policy research. Mr. Adam Coleman. He's in video. How does just, okay. Mr. Adam Coleman is celebrating his anniversary in Turkey. Nice. Right? So he recorded a video for us. He is the author of Black Victim to Black Victor, which you can purchase in the back of the room if you are interested. He is also the founder of Wrong Speak Publishing. He writes about fatherlessness, homelessness, and masculinity, and the relevance of these topics today. Thank you. Senator Eric L. Buckson. Senator Buckson is the Republican senator for the 16th Senate District. Senator Buckson is a lifelong resident of Kent County and the state of Delaware. He graduated from Cesar Rodney High School in 1983 and the University of Delaware in 1988, and obtained a master's in sport management in 1990. He is a retired educator in the Polytech School District. Thank you, Senator. Ms. Ruth Briggs King. Ms. King is currently running for Lieutenant Governor of Delaware. Don't forget to vote. And was the 37th District Representative for 14 years. She is a consultant for the nonprofit organizations and strategic human resources. She has an extensive resume in a variety of fields, including education, with an emphasis on leadership, organizational development, and strategic planning. Mr. Ross Connolly. Mr. Connolly serves as the National Regional State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Ross directs strategy across 9 Northeast states, including Delaware. He works to advance policy that removes government barriers that hold Americans back from reaching their full potential and from participating in the American dream. Thank you. And Mr. Nick Murray. Mr. Nick Murray is a public affairs manager with Yes, Every Kid Foundation. He came to Yes in June 2023, with 15 years of experience in state-level politics and policy advocacy in the state of Maine and New Hampshire, working with think tanks, campaigns, and single-issue committees. Let us give them all a round of applause.
I'm probably already behind schedule because I had to walk so far. Thank you all for coming tonight and showing your interest in this very important topic. I hope that by the end of this evening, you'll be motivated enough to take steps to help change the story that I and our esteemed speakers are about to tell you. What I'm about to show you over the next couple of slides is what's happened to student learning over the past 20 years. First nationally and then in Delaware. And we often forget to look at it in this way. Next. Now, we all know about the COVID drop in 2020, but not many people know that these scores were declining nearly a decade before 2020. And what you see here in this chart is it's actually the average on the side, it's the average change, either improvement or decline in scores year over year over the last almost 20 years. So that's how you could look at this slide. And you can see that the peak happened in 2013. And we've also seen similar trends for this in history, civics, and reading. So it's widespread. Next. Now, what set off the decline? I'm going to talk about the federal education interventions first. These altered education approaches over the years. So if you look at the right here, No Child Left Behind, that began in 2003, so nearly 21 years ago. It did three things at the federal level: set high standards, established measurable goals, and required low-income schools to show improvement in return for federal money. All students here, this actually surprised me when I looked at this, but all students were benefiting by that. If you can see between the low performers and the high performers, that there wasn't much gap there between them. So that personally surprised me. In 2010 then, the next thing was Common Core that was introduced. And their improvement, I would say, just kind of stalled. Didn't quite do the upward movement. But then just 2 years later in 2012, opponents of No Child Left Behind asserted that the financial punishments, or what were intended to be incentives, hurt the schools and didn't contribute to the improvement of student education, despite what you see there. So President Obama gave waivers from the NCLB to give the states more flexibility. Then, here we go, another 3 years later, in 2015, there's Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA. That gave states and districts greater independence, something that people thought should have improved education, but it hasn't. Instead, the lower performing student scores fell below the national average, and they haven't recovered since. So why did all students perform better for 9 years from 2003 to 2011? And why did the gaps begin to open up after that? What this slide tells me is that whatever factors may be in play, and there are probably more factors in play, we achieved better equity and higher student outcomes under No Child Left Behind. So, there was a lot of angst about this strict accountability and challenging standards, but at the end of the day, it was effective for all students. Next. So let's look a little closer at Delaware. So we kind of look at what do you think stands out here? Well, if you look here, this also surprised me. The lower performing performers were improving more than the high performing students were. And then when you get to 2010, 2011, when some of the changes started being made, as the federal government was returning more and more accountability to the states over time, our scores dropped well under the national average. And that's this line right here. Next. By the way, just to complete the idea, if we could go back one slide, the lower performing students' math scores have not risen in 15 years. And now the higher performing students are catching up, but not in the way we want. So we've got to do better. I would point out that in 2022, Delaware spent just over $20,000 per student, and that's the 6th highest in the nation. Yet all that money resulted in finishing nearly last in academic performance for math and reading nationally. We could do better. Next. In Newcastle County, we're going to dig closer to home now. The situation's more dire, and you can see here, and you can see on your tables, there are additional schools that show you just how poorly these proficiency scores are. These numbers should shock you. Failure to achieve proficiency at elementary school level only continues as students move through the school system. They never catch up. These numbers represent a lost generation of uneducated kids. Now that I've totally depressed you all, I have some good news. Next. Here's an example where I like to call this slide, Poverty is Not Destiny. Seaford School District is the only high poverty district in the state where they improved third grade reading scores from 2019 to 2024. And you can see that it's obviously the tallest of the tables. Now, their results are remarkable because all 7 of their schools are Title I or low-income schools, and they serve a diverse, multilingual student body. Officials there say that their success is because of applying consistency across all aspects of teaching and learning. They use high-quality curricula, well-matched to student assessments, and all professional development trains teachers how to use both well. The district also made a concerted effort to address absenteeism, something I know Ruth is going to address. In 2024, they implemented the science of reading, or phonics. In the first year of implementation, 14% of Seaford's third grade English language learners scored proficiently in the state assessment. By the time these students reached 5th grade, that's only 2 years later, 41% of them were proficient. So they went from 14% to 41% in 2 years. That to me is incredible and exciting. It means there might be a template there and some lessons that other school districts should take note of. So key takeaways. Holding school systems accountable for their lowest performing students, it was working until policy makers were pressured to adopt Common Core and ESSA, which relaxed those standards. Yes, meeting the standards can be tough at times, but they do have a purpose. The second is we achieved better equity under No Child Left Behind for at least 8th grade math, but I suspect that is true if I looked at the other areas. And more money is not necessarily the answer. Seaford's focus is on individualized instruction and teacher prep, and it's working for them. So with that, I also wanted to make a plug. I would be remiss without having a microphone to make a pitch for what my organization cares about, among other things, is finding school board members who are common sense, who are willing to run, and for us to get out and elect those members so that we can keep the focus on accountability and make sure that some of these practices are being looked at other districts. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Tanya. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. So if anybody wants to run for school board, talk to Nancy. So I'm going to address 4 topics that have played a role in the decline of Delaware students' education scores over the past 10 years. These are the lack of direct instruction in our schools, which I will explain, not using the science of reading or phonics to teach literacy, and the lack of transparency and accountability in Delaware education. Next slide. So a research study called Project Follow Through was done in the 60s and 70s and found a huge difference in outcomes for what is called direct instruction over other types of instruction. These findings have been largely ignored because of an ideology being taught in teacher schools called discovery-based learning or discovery-based instruction. Instead of being taught to be the sage on the stage, teachers are told they should allow kids to figure out reading, writing, math, and science on their own, and the teachers would just be the guide on the side. This does not work. Exactly, of course not. Discovery-based instruction has been found to create more of a divide between wealthy and poor students due to the disparity in resources and experiences that children bring with them into school. So what exactly is it about direct instruction that makes it so effective? And you can guess we're not doing this in Delaware. It does not accept science of reading where it has been adopted, and it's starting. That's my next topic. Direct instruction does not ask students to figure the concepts out on their own. The instruction is clear and unambiguous, and there is no guessing involved. We'll get to that too. The teacher models what is being taught in small steps. It involves giving examples of what is being discussed and using illustration and teacher demonstration to explain the topic. It involves sufficient practice and review over time to move new learning into long-term memory, so it's not lost. Preparing curriculum materials is a full-time job. There are people who do that for a living. Teachers should not be expected to do this themselves. A lot of teachers do in Delaware. This is partly why they are so overworked and stressed. Instead, they should use excellent curriculum written by an instructional designer. Next slide. An example of direct instruction is using the science of reading, also known as phonics or evidence-based reading instruction, to teach literacy. Reading and writing involve a code of letter-sound correspondences that must be explicitly and sequentially taught to be understood. Phonics instruction involves learning the various sounds in our language and then being taught what shapes or letters or combinations of letters match those sounds. Learning to speak comes naturally to humans. Learning to read and write does not. What has been used over the past several decades in both Delaware and the rest of the country is called whole word or balanced literacy instruction, which encourages students to guess the meaning of words that they don't know based on the context, illustrations, and the first letter of the word. This does not teach students to read. It teaches them to guess. They do not become fluent readers when they are taught this way, and they have ongoing learning problems. There is an urgency to this issue because if students are not fluent readers by the end of 3rd grade, they will continue to struggle throughout their education and life. This may explain why only 41% of Delaware students can read at grade level. You may think, and I've had people say, but my child's teacher uses phonics, because you've occasionally heard them ask kids to sound out words. But if students are allowed to memorize or guess words at all, rather than being taught from the start to use phonics to sound out letters. This will undermine effective learning and make the student a slower reader for the rest of their life. A good analogy is if you learn to type by pecking at the keys, it's so hard to learn it the correct way. And this, of course, matters much more than typing. Delaware passed a Science of Reading bill in 2022. This bill requires all educators who teach reading to successfully complete professional development courses in evidence-based reading instruction. According to the Science of Reading law, systematic phonics instruction must be fully implemented by the 2027-2028 school year. That is 4 years from now. That means we will have 4 more years of Delaware students who will pass through our schools without being taught to be fluent readers. Are you okay with that?
No.
Me neither. Next slide. Now I'm getting revved up here just thinking about this. Now I want to talk to you about 2 specific ways that we at Caesar Rodney Institute, as well as other organizations in the room and individuals, legislators, have tried to increase accountability and transparency in Delaware's public schools. We addressed accountability with House Bill 192, the single-digit proficiency bill. House Bill 192 would have required schools in which less than 1 in 10 kids can read or do math at grade level to develop plans to improve their outcomes and to share those plans with the public. Another bill, House Bill 66, the school profile bill, was written to address education transparency, or lack thereof. The bill would have provided easier access for parents to see the performance, demographics, spending, and course options in their child's school and compare them with others. It currently takes 6 clicks once you go to the Department of Education site to find your school's report card. And this is if you are like me and you do this every day. If you don't, you have no idea how to get this information. House Bill 66 would have required the Department of Education to place a link to a school's report card on the homepage of their website. Make sense?
Right.
At last year's event, we encouraged you to contact your senators about these 2 bills. Some of you did so. Unfortunately, and some legislators up here can tell the story, some of the legislators did not listen. And despite these bills passing easily through the House, they were blocked in the Senate by one of the bill's former co-sponsors. He stated that he was no longer interested in supporting the bills because they might lead to greater school choice in Delaware. In other words, he did not want you to be informed so that you could decide whether your child's school was the best option for him or her and have the opportunity to send them elsewhere. He also did not want to hold the worst performing schools in the state accountable to improve their outcomes. Do you think this is okay? No. So what can we do to fix this situation? On your table, you have a paper with colorful squares on it. It looks like this. It's got information for 4 different schools in the city of Wilmington. This is part of the report card that the Department of Education publishes. So all of this information comes from the Department of Education, but they don't really want you to know about it, which is why it takes 6 clicks to find it. Specifically, these are the reading and math scores for Bancroft Elementary, Bayard Elementary, Warner Elementary, and Howard High School. Let's look just at Bancroft Elementary. You see that slightly less than 7% of the students there can read at grade level. So that means less than 1 in 10 students can read. Is that okay?
No.
Then look at the square below it, mathematics. There we see that only 5% of Bancroft students can do math at grade level. So that is less than, or that is 1 in 20 students can do math. Is that okay? No. And then look at the bottom at the percentage of students who are minority students at Bancroft. 94% minority students. This is the civil rights issue of today. This is unacceptable. It is not okay. Baycroft School got a lovely facelift over the summer and was renamed Maurice Pritchett Academy. But that doesn't change the fact that less than 1 in 10 students can read or do math at grade level. Their website, which I just looked at, shows a very pretty picture of the new facade of the building, but doesn't talk about the test scores. You can see proficiency levels of some of the other city schools there as well. And I'm sure that some of your kids or grandkids go to these schools. There is another paper, it was on your chair when you came in, called the Delaware Education Facts. We're not going to go through that whole thing because I know you guys can read, unlike some of our students. At the top, I have the average test scores for all of the schools in the city of Wilmington based on the Department of Education's own data. Do you see what it says there? 13% of students in the city of Wilmington can read at grade level, and 9% of students can do math at grade level. So the Wilmington city schools are atrocious. Are you okay with that?
No.
No. Do you think that parents have the right to know this information? And don't you think that the state of Delaware should be held accountable to fix this terrible performance? Yes. Please take this education fact sheet home with you. Show it to people, put it on your refrigerator so you don't forget. And we will send you an email after this event with this fact sheet so you can email it to your friends. And I want you, this is your take-home message, tell at least 5 people, share that with at least 5 people so that more people know how bad the education is in the state and specifically in Wilmington. The only way that we're going to see improvement in our local schools is by more Delawareans becoming aware of this poor performance and holding our legislators and other leaders, including the governor and the mayor of Wilmington. We may have the governor in this room, and he is on board with this. Some of the others are not. It is up to you to help us share this crucial information. Finally, we have a petition on your table. It's on the clipboard. This addresses many of the topics that we are all going to be discussing this evening and demands that our state leadership stop hiding and ignoring this problem and fix our state schools. If you agree with what we're talking about here tonight, please sign that paper. We will share this petition with state leaders and demand action. We will stay in contact with you via email and we'll continue to work with you because we can't do this by ourselves to bring about change in education in Delaware. Keep an eye out for future emails from the Caesar Rodney Institute. We may be gathering a group of people to go down to Legislative Hall and tell them what for. So if you'd like to be part of that, stay in contact with us. Thank you. Video, sorry. False advertising.
Hi, my name is Adam Coleman. I'm the author of a book called Black Victim, Black Victor. I'm also the founder of Wrong Street Publishing, and I'm a frequent contributor to the New York Post, amongst other publications as well. And I want to thank you guys for allowing me to give my 2 cents on the importance of family involvement when it comes to education. When I think of family involvement in education, it actually makes me think of my son. He's now 18 years old, but when he was heading into his junior year, I saw him struggling from his sophomore into junior year. I saw what was happening, and whenever we tried to contact the school, they were responsive, but nothing was really changing as far as his outcome. He was in an unhealthy environment, lots of fighting happening within the school, teachers who seemed disinterested, and lots of teacher turnover as well. And in the midst of that was my son, who actually wanted to learn, but he was struggling to be challenged, to gain interest within the different subject matters, and especially amongst all the chaos that was happening at his school. And eventually, it just came to a point where I said, my son is better off in my possession when it comes to his education. And so we took him out of school and we got involved in his education one-on-one, while allowing for him to work at a part-time job to show him the importance, not just of education, but of earning his own money. That's something that's really important in life, to gain that education, to understand the importance of money, the value of it, earning it, and it goes hand in hand with your schooling education as well. I believe that particular strategy worked for my son, but it wouldn't have happened if we didn't get involved with his education. So I think I learned a lot from the past few years, getting involved with organizations like this, talking to different education professionals to even encourage me to go this route. Because many years ago, I would have said, well, he's in public school, he has to deal with it, just like what would probably be told of me when I was a kid. But I think it's incredibly important to keep an ear out for what is happening with our children within public schools, and even private schools. If you have children in private schools, we have to be aware of what is being taught to our children, how they're being treated within schools, and because there's never going to be a bigger advocate than their parents. The trust that happens in school can only go so far, and the love for our kids can only go so far when it comes to these schools and how they interact with our kids. But the real love, the honor, the privilege to be a parent and look out for our children, mold them into being productive citizens of this country, that's our responsibility, not the state's. So when I think of the importance of being involved in our children's education, I see it hand in hand as being involved in our children's future. Thank you.
Good evening. I'll talk as I walk, and I want to say thank you for that reminder about Seaford Elementary School, because my granddaughters are very lucky. The twins entered third grade this year. Their other grandmother is a reading specialist that helps bring other teachers up to that level in Seaford. So it's no surprise that my granddaughter is going in third grade or reading plus third grade level, because that comes from parental engagement in that as well.
There you go.
You can go ahead to the first slide. It's odd enough that I'm talking as close to it as I can. It's odd to think that this time last year we would gather together and we were talking about student attendance and that the students were missing in action. Sadly, I can't tell you that it's any better today than it was last year. In fact, the statistics will tell us it's even worse. And as we talk and look at some of the statistics about Delaware's chronic absentee problem, I was at a forum not long ago, and they were asking what could we do to improve education, particularly in the city of Wilmington. And they said that children come to school hungry and all these other problems that children bring to school if they come to school. And I said, well, number one, it doesn't matter if they don't get to school. With a 25% absentee rate in the city of Wilmington, you can't teach, you can't provide any of the wraparound services. So the question then becomes, not only in the city of Wilmington, it's actually greater absentee rates in some of the southern parts of Delaware. Why aren't children in the classroom? Many times they're taking care of a sibling because there's either not childcare and the parent has to work. Sometimes they're helping take care of the parent. Sometimes they're afraid to go to school because of group violence or other things. The school is a reflection of the community, and the climate in the community affects the climate in the schoolroom. And sometimes children don't want to go to school because the climate is not welcoming or they're scared there. Negative impacts of student learning. You have seen, and I'm not going to review some of the statistics again. If you're not in school, you can't learn. And there's no better determination of the dropout rate. So what I want to do is connect a few of the dots for you, if I may, because we're talking, first of all, about teaching the science of teaching, which I helped sponsor that legislation very much. Thank you. And the problem why it's taking so long, we have to reteach the teachers how to teach. That's part of the problem. They weren't taught the right way, so we have to make sure they're doing it. But the negative impacts to student learning, if you're not on grade level, we've heard it, by third grade in reading, the chances of you being on grade level diminish. If you're not reading on grade level by grade 5, the chances of you becoming a dropout greatly increase. And we all know that what dropouts do to themselves in forms of poverty and in terms of social determinants. So those are very real factors. These things connect together, and a lot of it connects back to the school climate. And it reflects back to wanting to be accountable and having that authentic and real discussion about what is happening and not is what is not happening in our schools. And I will trip on you to student behavior. But another problem we have is not only are students missing from school, teachers are missing from school. You have a high rate of teacher absenteeism, chronic teacher absenteeism. And when they tell you the reasons for that, school climate. Right. School climate, they are being disrespected, and I don't want to step on yours, but they're facing some of the same challenges in the classroom. They want to teach, students want to learn, but there's a disconnect in those dots and how we connect those dots in education. You can go on to the next slide for me. So what do we see in Delaware? Some people thought chronic absenteeism really started after COVID, and it really started before COVID. But surprisingly, after COVID, it has gotten worse. And you might say, well, what's one of the reasons for that? Well, some of that comes back to policies in the schools, where if your child has a fever and goes home today with a fever, they can't come back for so many days till after the fever is gone, whether they're sick or not. And anybody that deals with children in a healthcare environment, a child can run a fever in the morning, be fine by that night. And if they don't have a fever the next morning, could they go to school? Not with some of the policies. The other thing that's happened with that is some of the parents are much more skittish now when they're sick, about not letting them go to school. And then you have some parents, because they thought, well, gee, they didn't do anything for 2 years during COVID. It won't hurt if they miss another day. Walk around town or drive through a town or a mall, and you'll see kids and you'll think, why aren't they in school? Because the parents are thinking, well, they can catch up. When obviously, many times they can. So let's look. Delaware's chronic absentee rate has doubled, and it's really, really high, specifically in Wilmington and other areas where you have that. National average, you can see, is 19%. We're pushing 25% in most areas in Delaware of absentee rates on any given day. And what's really sad is we've had to close school districts in the last year because we didn't have teachers to teach. And not only do you not have teachers to teach, you can't even find substitutes. And once again, it comes back to an authentic discussion about school climate, which I'm sure my friend will discuss. So let's go to the next slide. Student groups impacts. We see the greatest impacts from absenteeism are in those low-income students and students with disabilities. So those students feel disenfranchised, or they're not getting something they need in the classroom. The educational environment isn't right. They're not allowed to have sheltered or certain classrooms where they might achieve better. Under certain rules, the children have to have more open type of classrooms. But it doesn't take long to look at this and see African American, Hispanic are much more disadvantaged by absenteeism, and you have to have that real discussion about what is happening here. Why are those children not coming to school? Because their success in life is going to depend on them getting that high school diploma, and that high school diploma having value. We'll look at the next slide. I know I'm talking quickly because you give me 5 minutes. So the sad thing is student learning is not recovering. All these different things they do, and each year I say, what can we do for education? Not pass any new legislation. Teach and let the teachers teach. So scores for English, English language arts, and math is not increasing. In fact, it's decreasing. We know we have single digits in some of these areas. And if you look at those numbers and you compare that to the absenteeism is up and the student scores are down. It's a direct relationship between the two. Carry that on out, that carries out to the dropout rate. So we are in this vicious cycle that we need and we must stop. And we don't have all the answers here to solve that tonight, but there's some really golden and bold moves that we can make. And one of the first things we can do is our own assessment about student climate, which Eric, you'll get to that. Another thing we can do is look at the number of testing that we're doing. Some of us talk about how bad the test scores is, but let me explain this to you. Students in class that have special needs and certain types of testing, their special ed teacher will read the questions to them and they will answer the questions because they might understand, but the reading is not at level. When they go to take some of these standard tests, the Chromebook or the thing is put in front of them and they get no assistance to answer those tests. Whether they have a special needs or whether they have a language impairment. I represented a district that was 20% Latina. They were English language learners. Many of them by third grade were somewhat on level, but when I would go to graduation ceremonies, 8 out of the 11 International Baccalaureate students, the top students, were Latinas that had been English learners. Their parents couldn't read English. They saw that their children could. Those children rarely missed school. So we can look at these success things and say what makes them successful and draw from that success. Being in school, having engaged parents is saying, you will learn, even though I didn't, you will learn. And then you have the special environments and opportunity education to help the funding. It's getting the right money in the right place. You are investing enough in Delaware into education, but it's getting it in the right place. And the final lesson that we're teaching about school attendance is about preparing them to attend work and be good workers and contribute to society. Because if they learn early that it doesn't matter if you're in school or not, they're going to be the ones that are going to be calling out of work because it doesn't matter if you're there or not. So it's a vicious cycle. We need to connect the dots. I'm going to save my time and yield some of it because I want to hear questions afterwards that we can talk about this. But it's not just Delaware, it's a national phenomenon. Unfortunately, other states have moved the dial while we haven't. And we have the ability here. We have teacher capacity, we have kid capacity. We just need to get some of these rules and regulations. And I'm going to give a plug here with your Governor Mike Ramone and your Lieutenant Governor Ruth Briggs King. We have a plan to fix it.
You did a nice job. She's not kidding. If you'll indulge me for a second. That's all. We're good now. Appreciate you. My name's Eric Buckson. I've got 4 slides to cover, and I'll be brief because I do want to get to the questions and answers. I can do anything education, anything you want to talk about. I lived it for 30 years. The slide, if you want to go to the next one, is rather simplistic. I'm going to go to the 4th one in a second, but make sure you understand this. I've been giving these types of talks in front of rooms with folks that don't agree. I've been taking the fight to the folks who I believe we need to better get to have them better understand the issues that we're dealing with. So I carried this little simplistic thing to say simply this. I'm not an expert. What I'm saying is not absolute, but I will offer my thoughts. Okay? My story is simple. I just shared it with you. I did education for 30 years. I ran on education. I'm now a state senator, and I didn't come here to be silent when it comes to this space. And the problem with elected officials is this. We fail to humble ourselves. We sit in the room in front of folks who are, quite honestly, the experts in the room, and because we're elected, we suddenly have the most knowledge. We suddenly get to tell the folks that we're supposed to be listening to what it is that we can do to help them instead of asking them, how can I help you? Do we have any educators in the room? God bless you, retired or not. Do we have any parents in the room of school-age kids? God bless you. Outstanding. How many of you agree like I do that we've got a real problem in our schools when it comes to behavior? And that should not be offensive to say. It should not be offensive to say. Now I'm going to give you a real simplistic view of why I think it matters. Can you switch to, go to the next one. Now listen, what I'd like you to do, I'm going to come back to this if we have time, because this is what I created with my 10 best practices. Every election year, individuals come in with their best practices. So I came in with my 10 this time around. If I have time, I'm going to go through it because some of them poke the bear. They absolutely do, but they should. Go to the next slide, please. So this is a quote that I had. You can't put 25 hours in a 24-hour day and expect the classroom educator to excel. You can't ask an educator to be all things, and that's what we're asking them to do. When you look at the roles that they have to play, it's not just X's and O's. It's not just the ABCs. They're asking them to be counselors and mental health specialists and disciplinarians and attendance officers and everything else. And they're asking for perfection every single time. It doesn't work. The system collapses. It really does. And that's what I said. Go to the next slide. This is why I'm here. And then I'll go back. And I'm hustling a little bit, right, because of that 5 to 7 minute one. But again, I have a passion for everything that was said up here today. But here's it real simple. I say 90%. Over 90% of the classroom instructors say that disruptive behavior is on the rise and directly impacts learning. That was from a survey of 1,000 teachers. We'll use that. The union put it out. You may have seen that. It basically said what I've been saying for 2 years and everyone else has been saying, but for some reason, they weren't getting the message. Behavior's a problem, okay? Less than 5% of the school's population is involved with 90% of disruptive behaviors. See, that's a change. Somebody changed that on me. I put 10%. Why? Because it's more acceptable in the rooms where I am fighting the fight. And then I get to the 5%, because the reality is, here's what you got. If we're in a school district of 1,500 students, the reality is there's about 1,300 of them. The reality never got a referral their entire high school or middle school career. Or if they did, it was the standard stuff, late to class, maybe disruptive behavior, the normal things. We're not here talking about those issues. We're talking about the individuals who are roaming our halls, and I use that term because that's what they're doing. They're hallways and classrooms, and they're returning back to the classrooms, bouncing in and out of discipline with no effective standards. You can't blame the child if you're going to create a system that permits that, enables that. So we've got to change the system, because you're not doing a favor to that child who I say wants to be swaddled, whether it's a 7-year-old. You know how a child comes out of the room, you swaddle them, they calm down. You don't do a service to a 7-year-old who's out of control by allowing them to be out of control. They're asking for help. We're not giving them help. And then they turn into a 13-year-old, and now they're a 17-year-old. And you're scratching your head wondering about the behavior and their performance. The reality is they're doing exactly what you asked them to do. So we've got to change that. We absolutely do. This disruption directly impacts learning. It impacts teacher retention. There's no question it does all that. So what am I asking to be done? I'm asking that we put accountability and structure back in the classroom. We need discipline. Discipline can no longer be a bad word. It has to be. And it has to be a necessary tool to help the development of the child. Because when that child is not in control or not expected to be in control of their actions, how can you expect them to learn? And how can you expect the children next to them? How can you expect the teacher? If right now I was in the middle of a lesson plan and 3 people in this table were consistently disrupting this, it would be a challenge to learn. It just would. And we've got to stop saying that. Senate Bill 85 was a bill that was passed in 2017-18. It's what legislators do well. It looks good on paper. It was designed to require school districts to report data on discipline, suspensions, and others. The challenge with that is that it creates lanes. And if certain lanes have an exaggerated number, especially race, if it does, then the districts will have to be accountable for that. And the state will come back and step in and say, hey, you have to cure this problem. So the school districts started to set up policies. You've heard of restorative praxis. Yeah. Restorative praxis without accountability isn't restorative praxis. Even the folks that teach it and train educators will tell you that. But we can't use the accountability section many times because it runs data up. We've got to get back to treating behavior, right? We've got to get back to treating behavior and not worry about what the data is. Okay, how am I doing on time? All right, so look, let me go to, because there's a lot going on with that. Here's what I want to make sure you understand. I'm not bringing back paddle-ins. I don't want to see, the worst thing you can do is suspend a kid out of school. It's the most ineffective measure. But what you have to do is when the child is consistently bouncing in and out, you have to then take control. You have to assign and identify an individual structured tier 3 program in the high school or the middle school and allow them to flourish in there, but they can no longer bounce in and out. And if they earn their way out through learned behavior, good behavior, then they do. And if they don't, then they have to go to the next level, which is not in that location, but a separate off-site location. You have to put that back in. And if you do those two things, the test scores that you're complaining about, there's a lot going on. I promise you an improvement. I promise that. Now, let me go to this last slide. Can you, yeah, right there. I'm going to read them out loud. And you guys, if you're in the room, you'll know what I'm talking about if you're in that classroom. IEPs and 504s effective as all get out for a child with disabilities. But when you misdiagnose children and you assign these types of diagnoses to children that do not need it, you harm them for a lifetime. And we have to realize that. You challenge the classrooms when you do that. Focus on age appropriate. Guys, we got to stop convincing ourselves that if you start your child earlier, they're going to be smarter. Age appropriate, guys, age appropriate. I'm telling you that right now, especially our boys. We're telling our boys that are bouncing all over the classroom, stop being boys. What do you want from them? I'm telling you right now, little things matter. You got to hold people accountable. You got to be on time. Like we said before, you got to come to school consistently on time and do it on a regular basis. And then you get what you earn. You got to do that. Start children on time. I said the age appropriate meant go in. I cringe when I go into an elementary classroom, first, second graders, and they're sitting at a computer with their earphones on. Come on now. What are we doing to our kids? I know you can learn that way, but we shouldn't. We should not. All right? On time, no cell phones, guys. No cell phones are, I'm telling you, they are killing our classrooms. And it's time to take control. Almost done. Guys, make failure an option. Make failure an option. I don't know if you know this, but I believe in just about every district in the state right now, 50s is the basement. Did you know that? You go to school, you do nothing. You don't go to school, but you keep checking in. The lowest grade a teacher can give you is a 50. A 50. And then you want to know why they don't perform on a test? It gets better because over here it says credit recovery. You know why it's a 50? Because then you're eligible for credit recovery. You know what credit recovery is? Credit recovery is where instead of going to class, in English classes, credit recovery was started when we had children dealing with very serious illnesses and reasons for absenteeism. What happened was we took that and now we started to apply it to kids who maybe didn't belong there. They just weren't coming to class and you didn't want them to fall behind. So at the end of the year, you put them in front of a computer and you expect them to get an English credit in 2 weeks' time, the same credit that maybe your son struggled to get for an entire year and earned it. But you give them the computer option and they do it in 2 weeks' time. Nothing that I'm saying is false. Almost done. Poor decisions have consequences. Just talked about that. Quality credits. We got to stop worrying about kids graduate with 25 credits and make sure they know the 18 credits that they learn that are on the transcripts. Right on? I'm telling you that right now. We're getting infatuated with the number of credits that are on transcript. They don't know what's on them, but heck, they got the box check. And the last one, stop telling our kids that they have to know what they want to be when they're 25 years old. You're creating anxiety that's exaggerated and it's unnecessary. We don't need to tell kids when they're 13 years old that you need to know what you want to be when you grow up. That's crazy. Undecided should not be a bad word. God bless you. Thank you, everybody.
Imagine a world-class cancer center with state-of-the-art treatment facilities. Exactly what a child needs who's just been given a scary diagnosis. Now imagine that child being denied access to the public hospital because they don't live close enough. Too often, that's how public schools work in our country. In most states, zip codes dictate where a student goes to school. That means the access kids have to school that works best for them is dependent upon their parents' income in the home they can't afford. Fixing this inequality will require unusual courage from politicians. But even if we can't fix the whole problem right now, we can immediately begin to break down barriers to accessing public education. Every student should be allowed to attend any public school, regardless of race or income. Just like a public park, pool, hospital, or library. Because when we give families the chance to make decisions based on the needs of their children, we create an environment filled with respect, dignity, and diverse ways of thinking. Every student deserves the best education available, no matter where they call home. When we remove the barriers and boundaries, we open opportunities. When every child is given the opportunity to succeed, the entire population benefits. No more lies. Yes, every kid.
Well, there we go. Well, first off, thank you all for being here. I see a lot of familiar faces from last year. So a lot of dedicated people in this crowd to fix what we believe is one of the biggest issues here in Delaware. We at Americans for Prosperity Foundation, why do we care about education? It's pretty simple. Education, a sound education system, is the center of everything. It's what drives the economy. It's what drives success and happy lives and families into the future. And if we're failing there, then we're failing the future of our state and our country. Yeah. So we are dedicated to try to break the system that we've been in, to unleash the spirit of every single child, every kid, as we just saw in that video. Every single kid learns differently. They have different passions, and there are simple policies that we can institute that will unleash that spirit in children. And one of the big things is our system of education that we've been talking about today is built off in a 19th century system, right down to the bells in the classrooms. The bells in classrooms are actually from, that was very timely. It's time to go to class. But the bells in the classroom are from factories, if you didn't know that. It was from mills, calling workers to work. If you look at, there's a great meme online, if everyone goes on Facebook or X or what have you, where it shows the development of, here's a rocket ship from 50 years ago. Here's a plane from 100 years ago. And here's what it looks like today. Here's a classroom from 100 years ago, and here's what it looks like today. It's the exact same system. Our system is not built for the 21st century, and that's what we at AFP Foundation and Yes Every Kid Foundation are focused on doing. And hopefully we'll bring a little optimism tonight that there are little things, and there is hope that you can fix these systems and change them for the better. So I do have Nick here with me from Yes Every Kid. That's sort of my take of why we care. What does Yes Every Kid Foundation do?
Yeah.
No worries, it's all good. Yeah, we're Yes Every Kid's so grateful to be a part of this event. I'm Nick, but to echo what Ross said, it's really about empowering every child to find the education that meets their needs. And so we start from this position where every child has dignity, every child deserves something that meets their needs, lights up their passions, but who knows that child better than the person right next to them, right? So we're looking for bottom-up solutions. It means that we have to go to the families to learn what people want. So what we do at Yes Every Kid, we cultivate these conversations between families, educators, to try to understand what parents actually want, what families actually want, and what educators want. So to do that, we conduct a lot of polling, we do policy research,
But a lot of our work is done in state capitals around the country, trying to raise awareness of this. But I think the whole idea of the system really plays well here, right? Our system was built for a particular service. When we look at the results, I think one of my colleagues asks, is education working as it was intended? And I think, by looking at some of those statistics, you might say, no, it's not. But when you look at the history of it, and being at this factory, not only was it for the factories for workers, the schools themselves become factories and sort of turn out a standardized product. No child is the same. No child learns the same. And to think that we can use a one-size-fits-all system to inspire every child to actually lead into the next generation, actually cultivate the next generation, it's an old idea and it's an archaic idea. And so we're here to actually talk about transforming education. So it puts parents and families in the driver's seat and allows those conversations with educators to occur. So that's why we're here, and that we do videos like that, and just to try to change the culture around this issue. So I'm so excited to be here and talk about this. And now for a bit of the hope. So states around the country over the past couple years have been radically changing their approach to education. From Iowa, Florida, North Carolina, there's, I think, probably up to like a dozen states that have passed things like universal education savings accounts. It's something, if you were here last year, Rochelle and I talked about, is giving that funding directly to the parent and obviously having oversight and making sure that it's going towards education, but putting them in the driver's seat so that they can choose what is the best approach for their child. A great example of this we'll talk about for most of the talk is this restriction of you have to go to the school that you were born in the zip code. Imagine if you had to shop at a grocery store and the only grocery store you had to go was down the street from you. You could not go to any other grocery store. Oh, and by the way, all the milk is spoiled and it's 10 times more expensive than the other grocery stores. That's basically the system that we're in now. And a lot of it is a remnant I think it was the senators, someone mentioned how this is the civil rights fight of our time. And it really is. A lot of the policies that are in place are remnants from the 1930s to 1960s redlining that kept people in certain areas and didn't let them go out into other options, pursue other options, go to the good schools. In our view, the best accountability measure you could possibly have, if you disagree with the curriculum, if you disagree with the policies, or if you don't like the teachers or your student just isn't doing well there, the best accountability is for that student to go to a different school. And that's the force mechanism to have these schools improve and change their policies. Just one other thing of why I care about education freedom. Who here has ever been to a charter school lottery? Anyone? Few people. This is, if you've never been to one, I encourage everyone to go. Because on one side of the room, you will see elation. They have a future that they can believe in. They see the pathway to success because they got into the charter school. On the other side of the room, it's utter depression and sadness because they feel like their future has been taken away. What we want at AFP Foundation, and Yes Every Kid Foundation, is for every single kid in that room to have the same pathway, the same opportunity that the kids on the side that got into the lottery got through. So one of the things is that No More Lines coalition that we've been talking about. A lot of those big issues that the ESAs, the tax credits, the funding mechanisms, those are very difficult. I'll be honest, they're very difficult to do in very blue states. Unfortunately, this has devolved into a partisan issue. It should not be. Everyone should be in support of giving kids opportunities. But that's the way, unfortunately, it's gone. But that doesn't mean there's nothing that you can do to start to change the system here in Delaware. So Nick, what's Yes Every Kid doing for the No More Lines Coalition? Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the No More Lines Coalition, it's a bipartisan coalition of over 50 groups now. And so some of the big landmark groups that have helped us with this, Yes Every Kid sort of led the coalition, but we have Democrats for Education Reform. We have Available to All, our friends at 50 Can. We have Americans for Prosperity. It's a broad, cross-partisan, nonpartisan coalition, all about getting past the exclusionary school zones. As Ross said, the school zones are rooted in those redlining maps from the 30s that delineate, this is the hazardous neighborhood and this is the desirable neighborhood. And of course, decades later, after those lines have been drawn, we still have school districts that retain those lines. And there's no wonder why the disparities on either side of those imaginary lines are so stark today. So it's not an accident, but we put the No More Lines Coalition together to try to raise this conversation and talk about, what do people actually believe, right? Are the politicians there with the people or not? So what we did at Yes Every Kid, we went and polled 1,000 people around the country and asked them, do you believe that every child in your state deserves access to the public school that best fits their needs, no matter where they live, no matter their race, their income, their ability? 84% of people said yes. So that tells you the people understand this. It's the politicians that don't understand the gravity of the situation. We're talking about empowering families and empowering kids. So if your politician goes and says, I can't be for school choice, they're essentially saying, I can't allow these parents to have power. I can't trust these people. And so that's not the type of leadership that I think we're looking for. But when we talk about the No More Lines Coalition, it's really about getting all these groups together, speaking about it cross-partisan, cross-community, because when we look at these poll numbers, the racial demographics, political leanings, geographic leanings, they all come out equal. So, everybody believes this idea that a child should be able to find the school that best meets their needs. It shouldn't matter what side of the line they live on. So that's the basic tenet of No More Lines. And you get into issues where there are school districts that submit private investigators to go follow families because they're under suspicion of enrolling their child in a public school that's neighboring to their city. There's some terrible stories around the country. A woman was jailed in Ohio for 9 days for this. There was a man in Northeast Philly who took a plea deal because he was facing 7 years in jail for enrolling his child in a public school. It's just so absurd. So this is what we want to get this conversation about. It's not about the effect of the system. It's about the effects on the kids. We need to be thinking about how can we meet every child's needs and not how we save a particular system from whatever consequence that competition comes.
And one thing I want to make clear, I think it was mentioned before, the senator mentioned it, teachers are certainly not our opponents on this. Like, teachers I was a teacher, I taught first grade, which is fun if you ever met first graders. But they're the ones, unfortunately, we've tasked them with being 30 different things now. They have to be a police officer, they have to be a cafeteria worker, they have to monitor playgrounds, they have to be counselors, and then they have to go through an enormous amount of curriculum requirements that they have to comply with. So we're asking an enormous amount from teachers, too much. When the Department of Education was established many years ago, they had about 5 to 10 goals that they were trying to work towards. That list is now 50 to 100. Their roles and responsibilities have expanded so much that we're asking from teachers, we're asking them to be masters at 100 things, something nobody can do. Focus on the things that are most important and never think that teachers are the opponents. Sometimes they're the leaders of teachers' unions or people that are involved in the system, that they can often be our opponents. But advocate with what my suggestion is always go back to focusing on the child and the outcomes that we're looking for. The money doesn't matter. We're already spending in Delaware $20,000 per student, 6th most in the country. How about we use that a little more efficiently and focus on the actual individual student and how we improve their lives the most. Nick, what are some things here in Delaware that incremental things that we can sort of get to where it opens up the door to more expansive programs?
Yes, I had a good conversation with our policy team on this. So Delaware has an open enrollment program that we were talking about before, where you can attend a public school district outside of your home district or another school within your home district. The issue with that is the ways that the schools define their capacity is pretty opaque. We don't really have any transparent way to understand how many seats a school has versus what they say they have. And then there's also this prerequisite that you need to be attending public school first in order to use this program. So if you're a new student in the area, you like my colleague Greg said in the back, you have to fail first, right? The school that you're assigned to has to fail you first before you're able to take this chance. So it's little tweaks like that. But really, I think what we want to drive home is this aspect that parents in Delaware, they don't really know that they have the option to use the open enrollment program because the state doesn't have any great data out there about it. So there's not really a great way to talk about it, not a great way to understand what the problem is. How many people actually want to transfer? How many are denied? Why is that? And so once you have that information, and it's just a reporting thing, it sounds like the legislature gives the schools a lot of things to report. This should be one of those other ones. How many seats do you have in each grade level? So you can't say, oh, we don't have any seats, because of course they have seats when you buy a house in the district, right? There's always a seat there for the person who buys the house in the district. But so it's getting to this transparent aspect of what are the actual ways that parents can use this mechanism. So I think that's the most critical. I think when you think about all the kids that are in public schools today, we can expand options for each and every one of those students by expanding this program and giving folks a reason to use it. Obviously, we can get into the ways to fund kids directly, like Ross mentioned. We have polling there that shows 2/3 of adults and 80% of K through 12 parents support these direct funding mechanisms. This is across the country, across racial, economic, political leanings. So never think that the hill is too high to climb to make these cases, because the people understand, the people are with us on this. But just to get back to that no more lines point, if Delaware gets this the situation where we're reporting what seats the schools have, then parents can talk about it, then we can better understand this issue and allow folks to understand that they can find another public school that works better for their kid.
I do want to highlight that inter-district program. You're the only state, I believe, in the Northeast that has this. I think it's wildly underutilized. Again, that can be the accountability measure for these bad performing schools. If we get the word out that yes, you can, and we pass a transparency, we have more transparency in available seats, then you can really start to show there's a better path, and two, those schools are bound to change. Those bad performing schools, they'll be forced to change. Because just like a business, if people stop going, you're going to have to change your business model. And that's the signal that we need to send these schools that are unfortunately leaving students behind. So with that, please, we're here in Delaware. This is one of the big issues that we want to focus on. If you want to learn more about AFP Foundation, you can visit AmericansForProsperityFoundation.org, and there's some packets in the back to learn more about these policies, the polling that we talked about. But please, the best thing that you can do is be a vocal advocate going forward for these students, even if you don't have kids. This is the future of this state. It's the future of the country. Everyone should be fighting to fix these systems so that our children aren't being left behind. The next Elon Musk might be at a Wilmington school that isn't getting the education that he or she needs to provide an unbelievable service to society. So always keep that in mind. Nobody's beyond hope, and we can fix this if we all work together. So thank you so much for having us.
Okay, so if you haven't done so, please write a question for, it doesn't have to be for a particular person, put them in the boxes. Bill's gonna come pick them up from you. And Tina she's our newest hire at Caesar Rodney Institute. She's just gonna give you a brief history or background on Caesar Rodney Institute.
I just want to say one thing about the school choice program. It's at schoolchoicede.org. It's not even on the Department of Education's website. And the application deadline for the 24-25 school year was posted as being November 6th of 23. They've not updated it for this year. So you have to actually apply very soon. I'm hoping, I'm going to call the DOE, but I saw that on their website today. And I think it's important, if you're thinking about doing it at all, that you know that time is of the essence. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you. I will be very brief. I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Thank you to our sponsors tonight. They are listed on the back of your program: Americans for Prosperity Foundation, Better Delaware, Citizens for Delaware Schools, and Reach Gospel Radio. We appreciate you so much helping us get the word out about this. I am Tina Kelleher. I am the Director of Development at Caesar Rodney Institute. We are a nonpartisan think tank working to improve the livelihoods of all Delawareans through policy work on energy, economy, healthcare, and as you saw tonight, education. Behind me is a QR code. If you could be so obliged as to scan it and save it in your phones, please connect with us. We want to be able to continue to put on these kinds of events. I was just curious, who here knows what Caesar Rodney did? Yeah. So for those who maybe are not familiar with his story, he's the reason we have the Declaration of Independence. He's the one that voted for freedom. He was the deciding vote in Delaware. Thomas McCain and George Reed were split. You heard of those names because we have schools right here in our county named after them. And Thomas McCain got a word to Caesar Rodney on his farm near Dover and said, I need you to get to Philadelphia and I need you to vote for independence. And he rode 75 miles in a rainstorm on July 2nd and put in his vote for freedom. And in 2026, we are within 2 years now of the 250th anniversary of the signing of that document. And we do have a national committee, National 250, at Delaware 250, and Caesar Rodney Institute is working on this as well to celebrate that monumental event. So please stay in touch with us. If you're interested in becoming a member of the Caesar Rodney Institute, that information is also on our website. I appreciate you so much, and please let's continue to work together to make a difference. So thank you. Hopefully we've got some questions pulled. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, right? Thank you, everyone.
Well, let me ask everyone, how has it been hearing our speakers give us an assessment of the status of education and academic development of our young people? What do you feel? I think it is very informative that we know what our young people are faced with, our school districts, and how it greatly affects homes. As Dr. Hettler and others bring some questions to me. Yes. Okay. This question is, may I have your attention, please? School climate. What is being done to help teachers feel more secure? And what kind of, I believe this is funding, are new parents getting? What is being done to help teachers feel more secure?
I need that mic, I guess.
Yeah.
So this past General Assembly, we passed a school climate task force. I sponsored it. It was kind of diverted to one of the other legislators who took it on. I am on that task force. We've been at it for now 9 months. The proof's going to be in the pudding when you ask what it is that we're doing as a state. We're making recommendations. One of the things that I've recommended is a robust Tier 3 program. If you're an educator, you're familiar with it. If you're not, it's basically Tier 3 is the highest level of dealing with behavior in our schools. So you've got the entry level ones that everyone's kind of normal, kids be kids. But the ones at the Tier 3, we don't have the proper funding and the proper resources to deal with. So hopefully the task force is dealing with that. That's my hope when we come out of there. If we do that, that deals with the 5%, then the 95% are free to learn. The educators are free to focus on the normalcy of a classroom. So I hope that answers it.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you. Next question. What are the reasons opponents of school choice give for opposing it? I'll read that again. What are the reasons opponents of school choice give for opposing it? And how do we convince them otherwise?
So a lot of the opponents, almost always it centers on money. It's always focused on, well, this is the argument we see across the country in almost every state, that doesn't matter who is politically in charge or not, is that this is going to steal money from public schools. Many times that's completely incorrect. I'm from New Hampshire. We have it's called the Education Freedom Account program. They actually, if a student leaves the public school, the state board, now every state funds schools sort of differently, so keep that in mind. But in New Hampshire, the state portion is the smallest amount of money. The local portion is the largest amount of money. That student leaves the school, the local portion stays with the school. The opponents still argue that they are going to lose money. This is insane, of course, but also what we at AFP and the AFP Foundation always harp on is that this isn't about the money. So we always pivot back to what we're actually talking about. And I suggest you all do the same when you're talking to your friends, your family, your neighbors about school choice, education freedom programs, because that is really the single argument that I've seen, is that this is going to harm public schools. In every state that this is implemented in, maybe Nick, you can answer this a little better, but we've seen public school attendance increase in a lot of states that have passed the financial movement systems. Florida, I believe, has seen an increase in their public school attendance because a lot of students, a lot of families are going to choose to go to a different public school. They're not always going to choose a private school. A lot of times those are more expensive. They're just going to want to go to a better public school around their area. So don't get pulled into the financial arguments is my suggestion. We always eventually have to answer, that it's going to cost X amount. Almost universally, it saves money. It doesn't increase spending. It saves spending over the long term. But always pivot back to what we're actually talking about, which is the outcomes for students and the increase in well-being in their lives. That's what we should focus on.
Our next question is, why should parents pay school property taxes if they homeschool? or send their child to private?
So Yes Every Kid, our policy team is kind of working on a policy solution for this, because I absolutely agree with the question, why should you be paying double? But that's some of these states like Oklahoma, Indiana has a limited tax credit as well. But it's this idea where parents who homeschool or send their children to private school can retain a refundable tax credit for those expenses. So you kind of get around the middleman idea of the ESA, where you have to file an application, get a little bit of money, and whatever, you get it off of your tax bill. You say, I'm gonna educate my kids, so let's get some of your money back. I think that's a key small policy stance. It's like the child tax credit. It's like the federal child tax credit. We found when that was expanded, 30 to 40% of parents use that on education expenses anyway. So it's really getting back to this idea of trusting parents, trusting the families, and just to put a finer point on that, because some parents may choose a public school, doesn't mean that their choice is any less valid than anybody else's choice. I think when we want to make the case for parental empowerment and parental choice, we have to be there to support every parent's choice, no matter what type of schooling they choose, because it's their choice. That's the world that we want to live in, where every parent chooses the best for their kids, not that they're forced to go to any other school system, as it were.
Thank you. One more question? Okay, the final question is this. How would you suggest addressing the disparity in the distribution of discipline issued largely to Black and brown students?
Well, don't be scared. It's a fair question. That's why SB 85 was created. It was an effort to make sure that when you assign discipline based on behavior, that there's not some disproportionate racial component. It's a fair question. The challenge is, how do you deal with the behavior and ensure that it's properly dealt with, and recognize that there are some areas, some schools, where you're going to see a disproportionate number of individuals from a particular race, we'll call it. You just are. So you have to ensure that the policies are structured, that they're best practices, but at the end of the day, you assign behavior, discipline based on behavior. And I'll tell you why. You're not doing a service at all to the children, regardless of color, if you don't help to control the environment that they're in and assign the behavior to that child. They're in desperate need of structure and accountability. Many times these children are not getting it at home. The only place they can get it is at the school. And the children will respond. I did my first 10 years at a school district where they were handing applications because we needed numbers to some of their most difficult children. My father was a family court judge. I've gotten kids out of Stevenson home to come to my school. I've been to funerals, I've been to weddings, christenings, and vacations with these children. I ran the SBI program that I'm talking about, the Tier 3. Here's what I do know. When you swaddle that child, whether they're 17 years old or 7, and you start to give structure to their lives, they respond. Yes. They crave that. That's what they've wanted. And unfortunately, for the ones that don't respond, we're spending so much money in specialized care now in our schools that there is better assistance for those individuals that don't respond. So we can separate the ones that we can treat and spend more money at all. And that leaves the ones that need the specialized care. And now we can gain success. But this treatment of where we say it's okay, whether you're having a tantrum as a 5-year-old or a 16-year-old, you don't reward the tantrum. That's right? You understand it. You understand the child has wants and needs, but you also understand you're the adult. Now, for those folks listening, I'll end with this. Remember I said I'm not absolute? Remember I said what I just said is not perfect for all? But how about if it's somewhere in the middle? How about if we get balance? Because right now, there is no balance. Our schools are out of control because of a mindset that the kids are in control. Yes. And that matters because the educators are running from this, and they should. Thank you.